Today, America's foreign policy leaders are all over in Europe at the Munich Security Conference, where we've been seeing Donald Trump's infamous merit-based hiring play out in all its glory this week. When Pete Hegseth, the Fox News weekend morning host who promised to quit drinking when he became Secretary of Defense, read a statement that appeared to reverse basically 70 years of U.S. foreign policy.
We must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
After all hell broke loose, Hegseth was forced to make a new statement the next day.
I want to be clear about something as it pertains to NATO membership not being a realistic outcome for negotiations. That's something that was stated as part of my remarks here, as part of a coordination with how we're executing these ongoing negotiations, which are led by President Trump. So I'm not going to stand at this podium and declare what President Trump will do or won't do.
Wait. You're there. You're the Secretary of Defense. You set a policy as the Secretary of Defense working for the president. Now you're like, no, we'll see what Trump does. This all seems to have been a bit much for the senior Republican senator who actually chairs the Armed Services Committee, who called Hegseth's original speech a rookie mistake, adding, I don't know who wrote that speech. It's the kind of thing Tucker Carlson could have written, and Carlson is a fool. And all this was before J.D. Vance attacked our European allies and Donald Trump tried to shake down Ukraine for U.S. support. John Brennan served as director of the CIA, and he joins me now. First of all, Mr. Brennan, what do you think about, Hegseth? Also, in addition to what he said about Ukraine, he basically said we're not going to be a guarantor of European security, which was the real kind of 70-year break with the kind of global NATO order. That also seems to have been walked back. J.D. Vance seems to be sending some sort of cleanup contradictory messages. What do you understand about what U.S. policy here actually is?
I wish I could tell you, Chris, but it's been quite clear, I think, from ever since Hegseth's nomination was announced, that he is unqualified and lacks the experience to be the Secretary of Defense. And it was demonstrated quite visibly on the world stage in Munich. And so, again, I think it just underscores that he is way out of his league right now in terms of trying to represent the U.S. Defense Department with our foreign counterparts. But even more fundamentally, I think what we're seeing now with all of these different statements and conflicting statements, that there's a real lack of coordination within the Trump administration on these very important policies. Previously, in previous administrations, for something like the Munich Security Conference, you would have a lot of pre-event meetings, discussions, and coordination about what the policy statements are going to be. That doesn't seem to have happened here. And so therefore, I think it really is leaving a lot of our allies and partners scratching their heads about what really is the U.S. policy. And it seems to be very ad hoc, that they're making it up as they go along and they have to reverse course and change tack or whatever. So again, it's been an embarrassment, I think, the past couple of days in terms of what U.S. officials have been doing in Munich and beyond.
One thing that does seem clear, there's a few things that seem clear. One is Trump is going to have some sort of negotiation with Putin that Zelensky may or may not be involved in, or the degree to which he's involved is as yet to be determined. Maybe it's going to happen in Saudi Arabia, of all places. And it also seems, and this has been consistent, there's a lot of reporting that basically what Trump is saying to Zelensky is you have to give us something, including access to precious minerals in Ukraine, including rare earth, which is used for a lot of industrial processes used to make batteries and other things, and being very frank about it, like essentially saying we're going to take a payment here from you or else. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it just demonstrates that the Trump administration is going to use whatever tool it can to intimidate, to threaten others. The Trump administration is coming across as very arrogant, self-centered, and is going to push for its interests, irrespective of the interests of our partners and allies. And that's why I think there's just, real question marks about what is it that is going to come out of this if we're going to be shaking down the Ukrainian government. The fact that the Treasury Secretary of the United States appears in Zelensky's office with a draft contract basically giving the United States 50% of the rare earth minerals in Ukraine. It demonstrates, I think, the lack of sophistication and their ignorance about what the geopolitical realities are there. And so therefore, I think there's a lot of questions. I was in Europe earlier this week, and I must tell you that the frustration and anger with the United States has never been more palpable. It's off the scale because they really just see that there's been such a reverse, a 180 reverse of what the United States has stood for, especially in terms of European security, that this Trump administration has a much different attitude and approach that really is quite off-putting to them.
But the reception of those comments was icy at best. There were members of the German delegation who were hosting this event. The Minister of Defense there, as a matter of fact, denounced those comments. There were members of the U.S. delegation that did the same. And then, of course, Chris, you pointed out the fact that after that speech, there was this meeting with the Ukrainians between the Vice President and Ukrainian President Zelensky, and the conversation was about whether and how the U.S. would support Ukraine and begin this conversation around ending the war with Russia. Of course, as you noted, the question remains who exactly will be at the table. That is a concern that Europeans have expressed going forward as well. Chris.
So, Ambassador, you have the comments we just heard from J.D. Vance. You have Trump's suggestion that he will meet with Putin first. Zelensky is worried where he fits in. NATO is worried if they'll even be in the talks. Will they be left out of any conversations? What are you hearing about these concerns?
Well, I'm at the Munich Security Conference right now, and I can tell you the Vice President's speech did not go down well here. For him to claim that the biggest threat to Europe is within and their problems with democracy, when Russia has invaded a European country, nobody agreed with that analysis here at the Munich Security Conference. They also noted, the Europeans that I was sitting with while we listened to that speech, quite a bit of hypocrisy for the Vice President to come and lecture the Europeans about democracy when we've got a lot of problems with our democracy at home. And what was missing, of course, was no clarity about President Trump's position with regard to what everybody here is focused on, how to end the war. He could have used that speech to talk about that, and he chose to lecture the Europeans about their democratic problems instead.
And in the meantime, Ambassador, the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Republican Roger Wicker, said that new Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made, and these are his words, a rookie mistake when he insisted that the prospect of Ukraine returning to its pre-2014 borders was unrealistic. He also ruled out U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, which both the president and vice president have said is still on the table. You have experience negotiating with Vladimir Putin. Is there an advantage for him, 13 years as Russia's president, going up against a largely inexperienced U.S. foreign policy team?
Without question. Rookie mistake is generous. Senator Wicker's a diplomat and a gentleman. But this is not the way you negotiate with the Russians. I don't think it's the way you negotiate with anybody. But by making those comments, they were concessions to Putin. They're exactly what Putin wanted to hear. You have to give up territory. There was a second one, by the way. You can't join NATO, and no American troops will be part of the peacekeeping. Now, maybe in a negotiation, the Ukrainians will have to decide that they want to make one of those concessions about their territory, and maybe the NATO alliance will make that decision about that concession, and maybe the United States of America will make the third concession. But you do it in the context of a negotiation. You don't give away everything before you've begun the negotiations. And I know, having experience with the Russians, you give them something, they put it in their pocket, and then they'll ask, what now are you going to give me in addition? It just was diplomacy 101. You don't capitulate before you get to the negotiating table. And I hope that they learned their lesson.
Senator Roger Wicker shepherded Defense Secretary Hegseth through his confirmation. He got him through that process. And then he had some tough words for him overseas. He said it was a rookie mistake for Secretary Hegseth to outline what would or would not happen as far as Ukraine's membership in NATO goes. And then
I haven't heard that. I mean, Roger's a very good friend of mine, and Peter's obviously, he's been doing a great job.
Did you know
I haven't heard.
Thursday?
Let me look at. You tell me something. I have not heard
the
about.
question I had is, were you aware of what Secretary Hegseth was going to say in his speech at NATO?
Generally speaking, yeah. Generally speaking, I was. So I'll speak to Roger. I'll speak to Pete. I'll find out.
Folks, what we're seeing here, it's crystal clear, is that Donald Trump is pissing off the generals too. The rank and filers, the generals, everybody. People with military arms all down their chest, they are not happy about what they're seeing. Because Trump's plans, first of all, even if the generals agreed with Trump, right? Even if the military agreed with Trump's moves, they certainly don't agree with how it's being done. How policy just seems to be made through Pete Hegseth giving an off-the-cuff speech where he sounds like he doesn't know what the frig he's doing, because he doesn't. It's like, beyond the fact that he's kind of a scumbag, at least that's my personal opinion, he's not qualified for the job. He just isn't. He is not qualified for this. So even if I liked him, even if he said what I would agree with sometimes, it wouldn't come off well. And in addition, it's pissing off America's allies. Look, these military professionals, ultimately they're not elected. Ultimately, like the president's elected, you don't want a system where the generals can overrule the president, right? At least not unless the president's going mad with the nukes or whatnot. But like the elected officials should have priority. Nonetheless, they will be there longer than a president. These career military people are often there 30, 40, 50, however many years. They will outserve the best and worst of presidents. Some of them have been here through Clinton and Bush and Obama and Trump and Biden and back to Trump. And they've done their jobs the best they can, no matter who's president. And they know that just a few weeks of Trump has done decades of damage to the relationship between, say, the United States and Canada, the United States and Mexico, the United States and Greenland, the United States and Denmark, the United States and Panama, the United States and the EU more broadly. And imagine what he's going to do in the next 3 3/4 years. So they are not happy, and I cannot blame them.